Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're continuing with our 3 Rideamatics project, and again we're continuing mainly on the 1962 Rideamatic that we have on this bench here. Now previously we've been doing a lot of work on the electrical stuff of the engine, and today we'll be finishing that off, then moving on to the fuel system and seeing how far we get. After we finished recording the last video on this project, we got some releasing agent and sprayed it on the nuts for the fuel tank bracket bolts because they were seized solid, and we've tried them again now and they are pretty much still the same. Now we can't get very good access to them anyway, so it's probably not a great idea to try and kind of lever them off where they are. So our first idea was to take the fuel tank and the bracket it's mounted to off of the frame, which on 1961 or earlier models is pretty easy because the steering column is exposed, and then there's this upright that we were talking about, and the bolts are accessible there and there. Now on 62, Bolens actually added more bodywork to this area. They kind of made this shroud bit that goes over here and the extra stuff for the dash just to make it look a bit better, but it makes those bolts inaccessible and slightly unhelpful when all of these screws or screw bolts are seized as well. So we could spend ages trying to get them undone, but I think for today it's probably better if we try to progress with the fuel tank where it is rather than snapping tons of bolts and having to deal with that. At some point in the future when we restore this tractor, we're going to have to deal with that, but that's further down the line. So what we've done before recording today is we had a bit of a scrape around inside the fuel tank and then put a hoover in there just to kind of get all of the bits out. It's probably not the best we could do, but it's as far as we can get with the fuel tank still mounted. To give you an idea of what was kind of in there, that's the fuel bowl, which has got tons of little bits of debris in there. Obviously we'll empty this out in a minute. That's the kind of stuff that was all sitting in the bottom of the fuel tank that we've now removed. The first thing we're going to do is address these wires here, which on this tractor is far too close to the fuel filler points and therefore kind of chafes on the hood when you put it down, whereas on our other 62 Rideamatic that we have here is far enough away from it that it doesn't. So we were kind of having a look at the wiring, see what the difference is, and the difference is in the black wire that goes from the start button to the regulator, which is this black wire here, which on this one you can see it comes at an angle towards us here and then very quickly loops back and goes into this whole wiring loom bit. Whereas if we go over to the other Rideamatic, you can see it comes out at an angle and goes down for quite a bit and then only bends back right the way over here. So we're thinking if we can bend that wire a bit earlier, that should give us more wire to play with on here, and this can be pulled further over and therefore it won't get kind of pinched by the hood when you put it down. So we're going to give this a try and come back to you in a second and we'll see if it worked. We've made a few small adjustments and now the wires sit far enough away from the fuel filler, we think, so we are happy with that, I would say. And we're going to move on to the next thing, which is putting on the new ignition lock. Now this is a non-standard one that's on here, and it's the type that most newer tractors have, which is an off position, on position, and then a start position, which is spring loaded, which I'm sure a lot of people are used to, but you don't need that spring loaded position when you've got the start button like on a Rideamatic. So we're switching on a kind of original replica one, which is off and on. They're the only two positions it's got on it, and only two terminals on there as well. Now there's very limited space behind here, so we're going to have to probably bend those terminals out like someone's done on these terminals and the terminals on our other Rideamatics, which we've just checked. Sorry about that. But what I'll now do is take this key out, take the wire out, and we'll probably try and reuse this wire. It's a bit tighter than I thought it was, never mind. And we'll just take this off and see if we can get it out from behind the dash, because obviously what we were talking about with the limited space with the fuel tank, hopefully that won't be too much of a hindrance. See if I can now do that by hand. Kinda can, but I think there's just a lot of dirt in the thread to make it difficult. Yeah, this could take a while, so I will probably finish doing this off camera and pull this out. We've switched over the ignition keys without you, I'm afraid, and the original one that came off is actually a standard Lucas ignition lock, which we searched up, and these are installed on a number of classic cars, including Austin Healey's and AC's, so we'll pretend this came off an AC Cobra, but it was quite difficult to get this off because of the amount of space with the fuel tank, so we just kind of bent the prongs flat so that we could pull it out, and then used a lever just to bend that a tiny bit to lift it out. But it's out now, and the new one went in a lot easier because it is smaller. Now, we did find that the hole was too big, probably enlarged to fit this ignition switch, so we kind of put a washer each side to kind of stop that disappearing into the gap, and that is all now fitted up properly, and we're happy with that. We've also fitted a new wire going from the ignition key down to the coil, which I think was the only bit of wiring missing from this whole puzzle. But we're not very happy about some of these kind of uncovered bits of wire on the kind of permanent battery feed. Like this one, we've put some electrical tape over, but there's a couple of other ones that are exposed that we're not very happy about. So we're going to make sure that the bonnet is the battery is disconnected when we put the bonnet on, because it would be pretty easy to kind of short stuff out on there. Speaking of, we're going to kind of move towards the back and the battery for the next bits of wiring. We need to put a new terminal on the battery positive wire here, and we're hoping we can use one of these industrial alarm batteries. It fits quite nicely into the battery tray, although it is a bit thin. I'm hoping to use one of those. And to get to this area a bit better, we're actually going to take the seat off, which you've got to be careful with the seat cover on here, since you can't actually access the head of the bolt to make sure it doesn't come out and end up sitting below all this foam. Another reason for taking the seat pan off is that it's currently in the most forward position, so we're going to move it back one into the middle, which I think is where we're going to kind of leave our default seat position now. There we are. That's that off. I'll leave it as is so that I don't accidentally push that bolt through or anything. Leave that all there. As you can see, we've got a lot more space now to work with this stuff. That's the earth cable. Probably just need to scrape a bit of that paint off. And then we need to put, as I said before, the new terminal on there. We've just quickly made up this battery bar off camera, and it seems to work quite well. It keeps that nice and tight on there. We do need to cut these bolts down a bit, but that's a 2-second job with the angle grinder. Just cut, done. And then that is all ready to go. We've put a new heat sink part over here, which just needs the heat applying to it to kind of cover up that cable, make it look a bit nicer. Then we've taken the old crimp off this side, and we've got this one on here ready to go, and a heat sink ready for when that is on. Now I'm going to use the hydraulic crimpers because it's a pretty big crimp, and these are quite the pain sometimes to deal with. And yeah, we'll just see how this goes. There we are, I'll let that off, see what it looks like. I need to give that a crack.
It slipped a bit.
Yeah, it did come off a tiny bit, but at the same time, pulling it isn't moving. There we are, that's both of the heat shrinks done on these terminals now, so they are pretty much ready to be connected once we've got everything else sorted. Now we did have this whole battery stuff connected up, however we came across a couple of problems, so we've temporarily disconnected it. The first of which being around the earthing system, which on one of these tractors is quite simple. You just have this lead going from the earth point of the battery onto the chassis here, or mainly the part on the toolbox that mounts to the rear fender, and then that is expected to go through all of the chassis parts to earth the whole chassis effectively. However, we found that the earth wasn't actually transferring to any of the other panels, probably because someone's used red gloss painting both sides of these brackets, and then painted most of the bolts as well. So the earth wasn't actually transferring very far. It was in the fenders and the toolbox, but we couldn't get it through to the chassis, and we spent quite a while trying to trace where the issue was. And in the end, we replaced one of the bolts connecting the seat support to the toolbox to the chassis, and kind of having a bolt with no paint on it whatsoever and grinding some of the paint off the surface there allowed it to then go through to the chassis, and we traced the earth around, and that is all good now. So that was problem one sorted. Problem two is in the ignition switch, and as you can see, the one we put on is now off, and that's because we made a bit of a mistake in that we hadn't considered that this ignition key is for a magneto ignition system, and obviously we bought this before we decided to change it to battery ignition, and obviously didn't consider that fact. Now INDAC do actually make two terminal battery ignition switches, but we're struggling to source one of those at the moment, but when we do, that will go onto this. However, for the moment we've put back on the ignition switch that we took off of it and set it up so that although it has three positions, the on position acts as the second position, and we just ignore the spring-loaded start position, and we'll use it like that for as long as needed until we can source a replacement for one of these. Now, with those problems kind of dealt with, we've disconnected a couple of things like the choke cable and stuff from the carburetor, because we're now going to take this off to give it a bit of clean. Now, it's quite a confined area around here, but I will just take these bolts off, but that could take quite a while, I think. We've got the carb off now, and we started to disassemble it. In the past, it appears that someone's over tightened the bolt that holds the fuel bowl on, so a couple of kind of seconds with the impact driver, and that got that off eventually. There is a bit of dirt in the fuel bowl, however, the condition of the inside of the carb appears to be quite clean, especially when you compare it to what someone's done to the outside with all that paint and other muck that's on there. That's pretty good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try not to disassemble it any further. We're going to put some fuse wire through certain bits to clean them up, and also put the air line through it as well to try to blow out any debris. Then we will use some carb cleaner and put it back together. We're now putting the carburetor back on. It's only off for a blink of an eye, and that is, there we are, pretty much tightened up again now. So what we're thinking of doing now is connecting the fuel line back up onto there, and what we'll do is we'll put some fuel in the tank and see if it leaks, and if it does, where, so that we can kind of fix that issue. You might have noticed that we're kind of going quickly through these things because we're just trying to get it running at this stage. So what we'll do is we will get some fuel in there, and while we're waiting for it to kind of show if it's going to leak or not, we'll go through a few other things that we want to go through before trying to start it up. So we have a small list of things that we need to do before we can try and start this up. Now obviously we're going to want to connect or put the belt back on that connects the starter motor and the engine, and to do that we've got to get the spring mounting stuff done for the starter motor. So we've put a tap through the thread in that kind of mounting lobe. Now before, when we got this tractor, it had this bolt through there, but as we've said before, in the bag of many things that we found in the toolbox was this, which is the original spring mount. However, this should actually have a longer thread on it than it does. That's probably snapped in the past. I will just thread this in here to kind of demonstrate what I mean. That goes in there nicely now. Now, as you can see, the thread kind of ends at the end of the starter motor there. However, what that should have is another maybe ½ inch of thread, or maybe not that much, but a decent amount sticking out, so that you can put a nut on this side to kind of lock that up to it even better. And then obviously the spring mounts from there down to here. We haven't bought any springs, so we're going to have to steal one, unfortunately. And the only one of these Rideamatics that has a spring on it is this 61, which is actually a good show of the amount of thread sticking out there that should be on it. But I will just pull this spring off here. That's easily put back onto this one. And we also need to measure these so that we can order a couple of them. And obviously that just goes, well, make sure I've got my ends the right way around. Do that in a minute, because that looks like it's, don't know if that's going to be especially easy. Oh, there we are. Actually, I should probably wait until we've got the bolt on, or the belt on there, and then connect that up. But something worth noting is we did actually buy some ½ inch hex stock, which I have here. And in future, we're going to do some lathe work to make up a new one of these for this, so that we can then have a longer thread on it and take it back to what it should be with that nut on there. Now, the other thing is we need the belt guard that mounts on the engine to kind of go around here like that and push the belt up and kind of take the tension off of it, so that you can put the tractor into neutral and stuff like that. Which, for now, we are going to steal the one off this tractor. We don't like stealing bits off of other tractors, but for now that'll have to do. And in future we'll have to get one of these from America, or make one up, which we have done before for the other 1962 Rideamatic, the gold one. So we're going to now pinch this off of here to put onto the red 62. Now, I'll admit we have actually loosened off these bolts quickly because we didn't want to snap them. I will now whip these off on camera. That's one. And that's two. So now I can pull that off. There we are. Maybe get a bit of the rust off of there. Then we can bolt this straight onto the other one. We've given this a very brief clean up just to get kind of some of the lumpy rust off of there. And the purpose of this bracket, as we've described before, is essential because, as you can see, even though that belt is loose, when I turn the engine, it's still pulling those pulleys, which would mean that there's still drive going to the back axle and the gearbox and stuff, so you couldn't actually change gear properly. However, when I put this on, even if I don't bolt it up, I'll show you this, kind of how this works. That's not bolted up, okay? But just in the general position of it, there, you can see that stops that movement of that other pulley by kind of moving the looseness of the belt that way, and that stops all drive going to the back axle. So as I said, completely essential, and we have actually run a tap through these threads on the engine here before because we knew we would have to do this. So I'll now bolt these up, and then that'll be permanently one step closer to being ready. That belt guard is now on there, and with that we have pretty much put on everything that we need to try to start this tractor now. However, we are not going to today, and we have reasons for this. We don't want to just kind of start it up and run indoors for dinner because it has been quite a long day, and it's probably going to turn out to be quite a long video as well. So since we're near the end of the day, we're not going to try starting it up and then just turning it off 2 seconds later, because that's not a proper test of how well this works. So our plan is we're going to leave this video here, and then in the next video we're going to go around to all of the various grease points and grease literally everything up, because looking around this tractor it looks pretty dry, so it needs it. Then we've got a couple of other things to do, like investigating why this gear selector panel is loose. So tightening that up or working out why it's loose, because those threads definitely don't feel the cleanest. Whack the seat back on, then we'll be ready to test, see if it starts. If that goes well, then we can then either get it off the bench if we start it on the bench, or we can take it off, see if it starts, and then take it for a drive if all goes well. But obviously, with a lack of time now today, we wouldn't be able to do that if that started up nicely. So that is why we're going to end here on a bit of a cliffhanger. But that is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.